January 15th, 2016. Friday of the first week in Ordinary Time.
A reading from the first book of Samuel. All the elders of Israel came in a body to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, "Now that you are old, and your sons do not follow your example, appoint a king over us, as other nations have, to judge us." Samuel was displeased when they asked for a king to judge them. He prayed to the Lord, however, who said in answer, "Grant the people's every request. It is not you they reject. They are rejecting me as their king." Samuel delivered the message of the Lord in full to those who were asking him for a king. He told them, "The rights of the king who will rule you will be as follows. He will take your sons and assign them to his chariots and horses, and they will run before his chariot. He will also appoint from among them his commanders of groups of 1,000 and of 100 soldiers. He will set them to do his plowing and his harvesting, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will use your daughters as ointment makers, as cooks, and as bakers. He will take the best of your fields, vineyards, and olive groves, and give them to his officials. He will tithe your crops and your vineyards, and give the revenue to his eunuchs and his slaves. He will take your male and female servants, as well as your best oxen and your asses, and use them to do his work. He will tithe your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When this takes place, you will complain against the king whom you have chosen, but on that day the Lord will not answer you." The people, however, refused to listen to Samuel's warning, and said, "Not so! There must be a king over us. We too must be like other nations, with a king to rule us, and to lead us in warfare and fight our battles." When Samuel had listened to all the people had to say, he repeated it to the Lord, who then said to him, "Grant their request, and appoint a king to rule them." The word of the Lord.
The responsorial psalm. The response is, "Forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord." Blessed the people who know the joyful shout. In the light of your countenance, O Lord, they walk. At your name they rejoice all the day, and through your justice they are exalted. Forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord. For you are the splendor of their strength, and by your favor our horn is exalted. For to the Lord belongs our shield, and to the Holy One of Israel, our King. Forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. When Jesus returned to Capernaum after some days, it became known that he was at home. Many gathered together, so that there was no longer room for them, not even around the door, and he preached the word to them. They came bringing to him a paralytic carried by 4 men. Unable to get near Jesus because of the crowd, they opened up the roof above him. After they had broken through, they let down the mat on which the paralytic was lying. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to him, "Child, your sins are forgiven." Now some of the scribes were sitting there asking themselves, "Why does this man speak that way? He is blaspheming. Who but God alone can forgive sins?" Jesus immediately knew in his mind what they were thinking to themselves. So he said, "Why are you thinking such things in your hearts? Which is easier, to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Rise, pick up your mat and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins on earth," he said to the paralytic, I say to you, rise, pick up your mat and go home." He rose, picked up his mat at once, and went away in the sight of everyone. They were all astounded and glorified God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." The Gospel of the Lord.
January 15th, Friday of the first week in Ordinary Time. The first reading comes from 1 Samuel 8, 4-7 and 10-22a. This passage comes from a time when Samuel has grown older, and the people of Israel realize that Samuel being a judge, the rule of Israel will not pass down to one of his relatives, because judges were charismatically called leaders. At this point, Israel is not really a united entity. It's more a federation of tribes. The technical term is Amphictyony. It means a federation of tribes gathered around a central shrine, the shrine at which Eli the priest had worshipped, the shrine which holds the Ark of the Covenant. Well, the people of Israel want a unified government because they realize that every time they're attacked, it takes a long time to gather forces together. Sometimes tribes won't show up. It's a very inefficient way of ruling. So they ask for a king. Now the difficulty is, God is the king of Israel. By asking for a king, they're in a sense insulting God. At first, Samuel is against this, but God tells him, do whatever they ask. And so he does, but he also warns them that the king will demand many things from them. He'll demand privileges. He'll demand taxes and riches. He'll ask for their children to serve him as servants and slaves. And they say, we want it anyways. This passage probably was written by one of the northern authors around 850 BC. The southern authors, who write around 950 BC during the reigns of David and Solomon, are very favorable towards the monarchy. But the northern authors are writing in a kingdom where it was more of a banana republic than anything. You would have one king after another, one dynasty after another, and the kings weren't faithful to the ways of the Lord. The prophets were. And so the negative portrait of the monarchy probably comes from the north, around 850 BC. And you do see a tension between these two opinions of the monarchy. In the south, the monarchy is seen as the best thing that God could ever do for Israel. In the north, it's seen as the biggest mistake that Israel ever made. The Gospel is from Mark 2, 1-12. Jesus is in Capernaum teaching, and many people are gathered around the house. 4 men bring one of their friends, a paralytic, and they want to bring him in so that Jesus might heal him, but there's no room. So they make a hole in the roof and lower him down. Well, when they lower him down, Jesus first responds to him, "Your sins are forgiven." That isn't exactly what the man expected. And in fact, the people around are very upset by that, because who can forgive sins? Only God. And Jesus is therefore appropriating to himself a prerogative that belongs only to God. He says to them, which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven, or to say take up your mat and walk? They would naturally say it's easier to say take up your mat and walk. It's a lot easier to heal a broken leg than a broken heart. Jesus, to show them that he had the authority, says take up your mat and walk, and he in fact does that. And everybody's filled with a sense of astonishment. Now, it's very interesting to look at this story from a form-critical point of view. Form-critical, it's a miracle story. And how are miracle stories normally told? First, there's a description of the situation, then there's an appeal, do something. Then the action by Jesus, sometimes an action, sometimes a word, and then the reaction of the crowd. The description of the situation, the 4 friends bringing the paralytic in, opening the roof. The appeal, lowering the man in front of Jesus. No words are spoken, but it's obvious they expect him to do something. The action, your sins are forgiven. The reaction, the anger of the Pharisees. And isn't that odd? Jesus has done this man a tremendous favor. As far as Jesus is concerned, the man's going to be carried out paralyzed, but with a big grin on his face, because his heart is healed. That's the most important thing. Because of the negative reaction of the Pharisees, the leaders of the Jews, he has to perform a second action, which is to heal this man physically. And then the reaction is appropriate. Everybody's filled with wonder. We've never seen anything like this. It's very important to look at how stories are told and not just what is said, because the biblical authors knew these techniques and they knew how to twist them in order to make us pay attention to certain details. The detail here which is most important, the healing of the heart, and then the inappropriate response. People are angry because of that. You would think that they would be joyful that the man has a conscience which is clean, which is pure, and instead they're angry. It's very much like the brother of the prodigal son who's angry when his brother is forgiven. We have to ask ourselves whether we fit into that situation, whether when we see people getting away with murder, we are very angry when they're forgiven, whether we want people to be punished as opposed to wanting to be instruments of mercy. And may God bless us.